In 1858, a sweet shop in the UK accidentally made a batch of sweets with poisonous arsenic trioxide, which on the shelf just looks like any other white crystallized powder like sugar or salt, and was rather a common household item at the time. 20 people died from the incident and over 200 people suffered poisoning effects. And although this was an accident, intentional adulteration of food was very common at the time, as a way to both try to preserve food for longer, but also because people tried to make more money off of it, such as diluting milk with water and plaster. There was also a case in the 1900s where beer had been poisoned by arsenic from impure sugar made with sulfuric acid. More than 6,000 people were poisoned this time, and at least 70 people died. This was such a problem at the time that the chemist Arthur Hill Hassall examined 3,000 samples of food between 1850 and 1856 and found that 65% of them were adulterated in some way. Cosmetics fared much the same at the time. Recipes for homemade concoctions were popular, and beauty standards at the time encouraged anything from drops of belladonna in one's eyes to induce watery eyes, to white lead paint, which has a long history of being used as white makeup to make them look as pale as possible, fitting with the painted lady aesthetic that was popular at the time, and to remind everyone that they were privileged enough to not have to work outside all day and develop a tan. Today, a lot of us are used to food coming with handy-dandy lists on the back telling us more or less accurately what our food is made up from. I'm looking at you, spices and natural aromas. This is useful not just if you have a severe food allergy and could quite literally die if you ingest the wrong thing, but also for anyone wanting to know what they are putting in their bodies and perhaps want to avoid certain ingredients for whatever reason, dietary, culturally, religiously, what have you, with some of the more common allergens like nuts and dairy often highlighted in bold for easy skimming. For cosmetics, it is much the same, with common skin sensitizers like fragrances and parabens having a maximum percentage that a product may contain for overall caution and safety. After all, the skin is an important barrier, ceaselessly protecting us from infection, dehydration, and other environmental hazards. Why is it then that other things that are also in direct contact with our skin, the biggest organ in our body, are not regulated nearly as much, even though people are known to develop allergies and other chronic illnesses from their proximity as well? I am talking, of course, about clothes. More specifically about all the stuff that is in our clothes, in addition to the short list of fibers that is currently all the information we are getting from the garment tag. Because many of the clothes we buy today have more in common with cosmetics than the natural fiber they may or may not have been made from, with ingredient lists as long as anything you've ever seen on a bottle of lotion. And yet, the garment tag may lead us to believe otherwise. And in my own work of researching and sharing what I learn about the chemistry of the textile industry, I get the impression that a lot of people are surprised at just how much chemistry is involved in the clothes that we are wearing. Indeed, it has been a long time since clothes were a relatively simple combination of plant or animal-based fibers spun into thread and woven or otherwise made up into textiles, and maybe or maybe not mordanted and dyed into a number of different hues. No. One of the biggest drivers of the Industrial Revolution were textiles, with the spinning jenny and mechanized weaving mills leading the way. It would be strange if clothes were not equally involved in the enormous host of changes we've seen in the last 100 years plus. Clothes today, and fast fashion especially, are treated with so many chemicals. Some, like cotton, before they even leave the farmer's field. There may be chemicals involved in cleaning and scouring the fibers after harvest. Fibers may be treated with chemicals that make them easier for machines to spin. Woven cloth may be bleached for it to be dyed after, or just being used bleached. There may be wetting agents to make other chemicals adhere better, and factory workers in especially China and India may find themselves knee and elbow deep in enormous dyeing vats, where they do not even know what sort of chemicals they are working with, as dyes arrive in large pre-mixed containers, the exact contents of which the producers keep an industrial secret. Just a small reminder for both myself and the viewers that I was a little bit quick in the script here, and that dyeing factories in India and China do not all look like people hand dyeing stuff in vats and barrels. The scale is much bigger than that. They also look like large, heavy machinery that is operated from the outside. And the different types of technology in the different factories differ a lot. So there's definitely a hierarchy where a lot of the time, as Alden Wicker mentioned in To Die For, the most protected, most high-tech factories typically make stuff for Europe because we have the highest legislation demands. And then the second step, one step down, which is a little bit less supported, would go to the Americas, and the least protected production type factories would be people making stuff for domestic use. So just a little bit of a nuance reminder there. And I have to say, as a chemist who is used to working in labs where everything is meticulously, carefully labeled with contents and concentrations, lest we eye it with extreme suspicion and caution, I find the latter part especially harrowing. Just thinking about people having to work with chemicals they don't even get to know what are, so they can't even check or learn by themselves what they're doing to them. And, even in limited, if any, safety gear when they are working on it. And if you are thinking that they wouldn't understand the chemical names anyway, I don't really think that is the point. It would be the employer's responsibility to inform and educate the employees about what they are working with and what sort of risk they are exposed to. But with companies being allowed to keep such things secret, our fellow humans are not even afforded the courtesy of potentially learning and understanding what stains their bodies in the colors of the newest fashion seasons. And we are not even done with the textile treatments yet. Not to mention that even a 100% cotton shirt is often still stitched up with polyester thread. So if you are allergic to that, you are very often out of luck, even when you check the garment tag. After dyeing, there may still be printing, or there may be multiple dyeing steps. And especially the kind of plasticky printing that sits on top of a garment is basically just colored plastic. But to be honest with you, we don't really have much in cheap, environmentally conscious fabric printing that works on an industrial scale. As far as we know, almost all of printing that you see in fashion has some unfortunate chemical involved with them. The alternatives, they all have some issues or other, which is frustrating both for us as the consumers and people making and working with the stuff. In addition, a garment may be treated with a functional chemical such as formaldehyde for reducing wrinkles, polyfluorinated compounds for stain and water repellency, or nanosilver for antimicrobial properties. And we all know how putting antimicrobial stuff everywhere when they're not actually needed just gives the microbes more opportunity to practice their multi-resistancy, right? Incidentally, I recently made a video about functional chemicals in clothing, so if you haven't watched that already, I will leave a link that you may peruse if you are so interested. But even now, we are still not done with the chemical treatments, because when the garment is functionally finished, there are still more chemical steps to go, such as treatments whose sole purpose it is to make the garment soft as you touch it in the store so that you may want to buy it a little bit more. But though that treatment washes out and into our waterways the first and best time you launder them. Not to mention that they might treat the shipping containers with fumigants, such as ethylene oxide or methyl bromide, to protect the contents from attacks from like insects or fungus or rodents or anything like that that could harm the goods, which occasionally sends port workers to the hospital with seizures. Most of our textile industry uses lots of different chemicals at varying stages of production. And I don't know about you, but I find that really rather misleading considering how simple most garment tags are. Because we know that people have and do develop allergies to chemicals in clothing as well, not just from food and cosmetics. There are also cases where people develop truly debilitating conditions like multiple chemical sensitivity or mast cell activation syndrome, where you develop allergies to almost everything, and people often end up wholly or partially housebound because there are just too many chemicals that trigger their immune system everywhere else. And just imagine that if there are enough chemicals in clothes by the time that we buy them, and then that a small subset of our population in the Western world are developing these truly awful conditions, imagine the rates at which people are developing those same health issues in places like China and India, where they work directly with applying the concentrated stuff to the textiles that will eventually become clothes in a fast fashion store near you. And indeed, the data does tell us that the rates of chemical sensitivity in India and China is top of the world, sadly. And yet, despite all this, unlike people with food allergies, there is no code attached to clothes in the shops that tell you which potential allergens are present. No way for a person allergic to formaldehyde to avoid it by telling the shop staff that they have an allergy. No way other than their own allergic reactions or potentially very expensive lab tests, but otherwise just aggressive rashes, breathing issues, or something else. And a lot of allergies have a tendency to get angrier the more we poke them, so using your allergy to test what clothes are safe isn't really a good option either. I honestly, and I'm not just saying this for internet clout or whatever, but I honestly think it is very strange that the textile industry is still as loosely regulated as it is, not just because it is an enormous industry responsible for a significant portion of our emissions and global water use, but also because, genuinely, we have regulated so many other industries that interact closely with our bodies. Why not textiles? I don't think I am the only one who can honestly say that for the majority of my waking and sleeping hours, indoors, outdoors, working, resting, I am constantly both swathed in and surrounded by textiles. And there are many who are calling for bans on certain chemicals, and I do think that is an important part of it as well. But what we see again and again is that when a chemical is banned, the industry needs to replace it with something else. And typically they will look for something with similar physical and chemical properties, meaning they often look in chemical families that look similar to what was just banned. The problem with that is that if a chemical has similar physical and chemical properties and comes from the same chemical family, it very often also has similar challenges in terms of resistance to breaking down in nature, potential hormone disrupting effects, and bioaccumulation potential. And then the scientists need to play the chemical equivalent of search and band whack-a-mole, which is much harder when you are doing it blind. So I thought, and I don't think this should come as a surprise to most of my regular viewers, because this is something I mention as a lack or suggest as a solution towards the end of most of the chemicals in textiles videos that I have done recently or overall. But in tandem with banning some of the worst offenders, I genuinely think that asking textile manufacturers to list the chemicals they have treated their clothes with would be an enormous step in the right direction. Maybe they won't list all of them, maybe there are partial wins where they list the chemicals that are still present in the highest concentration when the product reaches the consumer, such as dyes and technical treatments that we just mentioned. But I really think that ingredient lists beyond fiber content on textiles and clothing makes a whole lot of sense, including pieces like the elastic, lining, and sewing thread used, which is often omitted from the garment tag these days. And so, because there is no time like right now, I thought that maybe we could have a try at seeing if we could make something like that happen. As a community, as a movement. I'll try to take some of the trepidation out of my voice because I really genuinely believe in this. I want to try to make ingredient lists on textiles and clothing a reality. I have no idea how to do it. I have never attempted anything like this before, but I believe in it. Why not give it a shot? And with this as the first episode, I would like to try to start a series that is basically just Kristine tries to learn how change is made by sending mails to people and advocating for ingredient lists on chemicals in videos and stuff. Probably. I don't know how often we would do updates. I'll still do other content as well, and I don't imagine things would move very fast unless there are big changes or big news in some way, shape, or form. I don't think this could be done in a wink either. I imagine this is something we would keep trying to chip away at for years, decades, a lifetime potentially from now. This is the kind of stuff lifetime commitments are made of, I think. I have no idea what I'm getting myself into. But maybe that is like not the worst thing in the world. Like maybe a tiny bit of ignorance is a good thing, since that means I have absolutely no idea about the legislative and political hoops required. So I'm not all that intimidated by those things yet. We'll just try it one hoop at a time and see where it goes. And here's another thing. When I was younger, I would have been unable to commit to a project like this, even as a thought exercise. Not because I didn't believe it was important, but because I would feel guilty about the hundreds and thousands of other good causes that were equally as important, if not more, and that I was quote-unquote abandoning by spending energy on this specific thing instead. But rather than working on some of those cases instead, I would just get decision paralysis and work on none of them, which benefits no one. But these days, I don't know, the community shows me again and again that there are so many awesome people out there doing their best to do their best and make the world a slightly better place than they found it. The books I'm reading confirm the same thing. There are so many people working so hard to create positive change in all sorts of fields and locations. So if I can trust that there are other people working hard on other important changes and causes too, in a way, it feels as if that sort of frees me up to work on something like chemicals in textiles. And even I have to admit that with my background in chemistry and my interests in crafts, I am uniquely qualified to work on something like that. I do tick the interdisciplinary boxes to dig right into the weeds and the details. Does that make sense? So that is, I don't know, my spiel, my speech, my naive idealism taking on something I have no qualifications for other than enthusiasm and the willingness to give it a go. And I hope you want to come along for this ride. I hope this is something we can try to explore and learn about together. I have, wait, very smooth. Can you see me? Yeah. I have a list of names that I am going to start out by reaching out to and asking if they could potentially be interested in such a campaign, or maybe they have some advice from running campaigns themselves, which would be equally as useful. I also did order myself a whole new project notebook that will arriving in my mailbox shortly, because I do hope, because it really does feel like in all sorts of ways this project deserves a dedicated space and book so that we can look back at what we may or may not have done further down the line. Although there were lots of issues with that poor order and they were out of all sorts of colors, so I have no idea what color will actually come. Maybe we'll do it in like a hot flashing pink. It'll be a very easy project book to find in that case. I will say this one thing. I may have already bought the domain knowyourclothes.com, and I'm hoping to build a nice little website for the project in time with a logo and some media shareables and, you know, information and resources, just the sort of stuff I imagine and have seen campaigns like this have or do in the past, introductions to the campaign, progress videos, however far we get or don't get, shareable content, or things to make it easy for people to get involved. I don't know, I imagine the path will be made as we walk it, which was something someone said about me once as an admonition, but I'll take it and make it a feature, not a bug. And of course, I'll also need your help. I already aired the idea, or at least the skeleton of one, with the community server, and a lot of the feedback was either reach out to people who might be interested and talk to them, and make sure to build and show that there is a public interest in the topic, so that changemakers and legislation officials can see that this is something their communities and their voters really care about. So, a lot more than I usually push these kinds of things. I hope you will like and share this video with people who may find it interesting. I hope you reach out to me if you know someone who may be of help to this project, or perhaps you yourself are a person I may want to talk to about it. What do I know? One thing about the internet really has proven that it is able to reduce the distance between people when it comes to getting in touch with all sorts of fellow humans in all sorts of different industries and cultures and, like levels of power and the halls of power and that kind of thing. I am really genuinely curious if we can manage to make a change together. This project might change course, but right now, this has a thing of feeling like a right or good thing about it to me. Like, what if we actually could make the world a slightly better place, a slightly more transparent place, safer for consumers and production workers both, potentially? How incredibly awesome wouldn't that be? This video was brought to you by viewers like you. Thank you so much to our amazing patrons who help me keep the lights on, keep the voids that talk amply supplied in cuddles and snacks. This would not be possible without you. And also just like allowing me the space and frame of mind to even envision an idea like this in the first place. Truly, thank you. Until next time, bye. Are you like right next to my microphone? No, you're not. Okay. Goodbye.